Welcome to the Environmental Justice Workshop. This is called Connecting with Environmental Justice Communities. And I thank all of you who've chosen to spend the next half hour with us. And I welcome you to this space. Our speaker today will be Karina Ramirez, and I'm going to introduce her just in a minute. Let me go over what our format will be for this workshop. Ms. Ramirez will speak for about 15 minutes on some questions that we've given her ahead of time. And as you think of questions, please send them in the chat to the Ask Me, Edie, who will gather those up. And then at the 15-minute mark, she's going to ask Karina the questions. So let's begin. Let me just introduce the support team here. My name's Ann Perry, and I am the liaison to NJ7 and the co-leader of the Unitarian Universalist Action Team. Ryan Carter is our Zoom tech, and he has done a heck of a lot of Zoom support work for CCL, and he's a member of our Raritan Valley chapter. And Edie Vincent Millant is has worked for FEMA for 11 years, and she is a CCLer who was one of the speakers on the 2020 Mid-Atlantic Conference. So I want to introduce to you Karina Ramirez. She is CCL's Diversity and Inclusion Director. In this role, she focuses her energy on working with volunteers and members of the staff to focus CCL on diversity and inclusion projects and initiatives. Prior to coming into this position, she was a volunteer for CCL, and one of her first volunteer projects was working with bilingual volunteers and helping to translate CCL materials for local chapters into Spanish. And she has helped with Spanish language websites. And she leads the Latinos Action Team and co-leads the People of Global Majority Action Team. So I welcome her to this space. Thank you so much for joining us today, Karina. We are honored to have you. So getting started, can you share with us a little bit about your definition of environmental justice and your experience in working with the environmental justice community?
Thank you so much for having me here this afternoon. It's been nice to be able to spend the day listening to the other conversations about connecting with different communities here. So I see EJ as a basic human right. To me, is the work has to be intersectional. In my mind, I want and wish that we would center Indigenous and people of color and be able to work with them to not only support the causes that they would like us to do, the solutions that they want us to support, and as well get them involved in what those solutions mean for those communities. So you would hear the usual the disproportionate in impact of the environmental causes on the community, but I really would want just more of the participation and the dialogue with the communities that are being affected. I want them to be part of the solution. So, and as far as me and work that I do, thinking about environmental justice wasn't even in my scope when I came to CCL. I had just, came over from the journalism world where I spent a decade working. And when I saw CCL, the thing that caught my attention was the bipartisan approach. Since I had come from writing about immigration and seeing how divisive that the problems are, And I thought, oh, I can walk into a space where people are having a dialogue about an issue that I care about. And that's how that happened. But again, I am also someone that is learning along the way. And that's what has helped me, do the work that I do with the support of volunteers, because I wouldn't be here without them. This position did not exist when I started volunteering or when I began working with CCL. So it's because of the work of volunteers that I am here, and I am constantly learning. So what am I doing in my own community kind of work? Um, I've moved, done a lot because of COVID. But right now, I'm personally involved in a local community garden. Um, is something that I got involved. I'm going on 2 years now, and just volunteering locally and learning what the issues are here. In my community, we're suffering from water issues from time to time. The water would just get contaminated, so we're dealing with that because I get notices from the cities. And I also live in an area that is forces me to travel. So I live in a food desert, forces me to travel outside of my area to be able to get groceries. So I get to see the environmental injustice happening right around me.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. Um, so some of us have tried and have been told we need to show up for the EJ communities, and tried to to get engaged, but the EJ communities often are, as you said, they're focused on water and they're focused on food desert and they're focused on more immediate things to them than the planet. But those of us in CCL world don't see much more immediate than melting glaciers, and how do we how do we reconcile that? How do we it can make it difficult to connect when our urgency, or my urgency, is on the planet, and I know we're running out of time, and many EJ communities urgency is on water and food deserts and other things. So help us reconcile
Um, Man, we don't have enough time.
that. No, we're running out of time.
We don't have enough time. No, well, I would admit, yes, the climate issue is an urgent issue, but food sovereignty is also an urgent issue, and racial inequality is an urgent issue. All of those issues should be talked about and discussed in this organization. And when we're talking about solutions, we should think about what we're proposing and why we're proposing the solutions. One of the questions, when I was thinking about this conversation that I would put out to the audience would be, what are we doing to help the communities around us without expecting anything in return? And I know that can be kind of hard because we are in this emergency, but we're never going to connect to people and know what are their issues that are important to them if we don't personally go and do the work that needs to be done. And that is to branch out. Yes, I know we want people to come here. I also want people to come here. Part of my reason for being here to make sure that I can see what policy we're going to put forward, and hopefully the policy that we support doesn't furtherly impact the lives of people that are being affected right now. That is my wish. That is my goal. I assume that everyone here that is interested in this conversation has the same goal. What we run into is like, everybody just wants to do the usual CCO work of dropping into these communities. I call it helicoptering. We're just going to drop there and say, hey, we want you to follow us because we have talked to experts and they told us that, this particular solution is the one to go to. But have you had a conversation with the person in that community? Have you asked them what is affecting them and how you can help them instead?
So we always talk market-based solutions, and that doesn't there are many people in the EJ community who don't want to talk about market-based solutions. What advice do you have for us on that conversation?
Ah, man, is I'll go and I say this. You need to know your history and what has happened in previous instances of people wanting to work with other communities and what has happened, right? I have seen this happen many times and in different places, not just in discussing climate, right? People go into communities, they go and they tell them, hey, this is good for you, please come and support it. So the EJ's community have their full right to say, we mistrust this market-based solution that you're proposing because of previous experiences. They're not wrong on that. You're asking people to faithfully trust you that when you put whatever solution you're putting forward, that is not going to further harm them. And this is why this conversations like this one are needed. All of the conversations that you've had today has been, how did you connect to people? How did you build that inclusive movement that we want? But it cannot be done without the input of the different voices. So I know that, we right now at CCL are supporting a market-based solution, and it's a hard sell. It really is. But there is a lot of conversations that are taking place, which I'm encouraged by, right? I see what the work that people are doing across the country. There are some chapters that are ahead of others as far as like making the connection, talking about solutions that support different communities. So in that type of work, we have moved ahead, and in others, I get the conversation, the question every single time: where do we start? And that requires you to come out of your shell and go to a place you've never gone before, and to table at events that are not your typical events. That go see if you volunteer at a community garden and see what kind of individuals you meet there. But yeah, it is a tough sell that we are proposing. It could be possible that we could be wrong about the solution we're proposing. We don't know that yet. But that we need to have discussion with folks about why we are proposing this particular solution. Why is it that we would, want for them at some point to think about how they can support it, if it is possible for them to support it. That takes a lot of conversation and connection.
So what resources does CCL have that can help us figure it out?
I have made a document. Let me find you the link. Because a lot of these discussions and resources have been created for CCL for the last couple of years, even in the last couple of months. Especially in the conversation on how do we connect with different environmental justice communities. And I will refer you to the conversation that took place with Dr. Barbara Love last September with the environmental justice and the presenters team. It was an excellent conversation where Dr. Love made the recommendations of how she felt, hey, if you want to engage with people of the global majority, the terminology that she uses, the ones that we use inside CCL, these are the things that you need to consider before you do. And the questions and the entire conversation of that session was very helpful for folks that are like very interested in doing this work. Again, have to emphasize that we haven't built the trust necessary to be able to have folks from the environmental justice community come our way. And there's work to be done. And yes, I don't know. There's time that cannot be wasted. So I would send people to the resources that I put in the chat. Take your time and spend time either in your chapters or individually looking at these resources. One of them that I highly recommend are the DEI workshops. We started them last year with the intention of informing people about different issues that affect different communities. And we didn't have a lot of participation. It wasn't a lot of, it wasn't something that a lot of people wanted to go to. Maybe I didn't do enough publicity on my end, so I can take a fault. But maybe there was not a lot of interest. COVID has completely taken over. COVID right now is affecting a lot of BIPOC and indigenous communities in a way that is is I can't even begin to tell you. It is just bad. COVID is a climate issue. Every other issue that you see out there is a climate issue. And if we don't go and find a way to connect our communities on those issues that are affecting them, I don't think we're going to be able to move ahead.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Let me switch now and ask Edie if she's got any questions that have come in to the chat.
Hi, good afternoon. So yes, we do have a few things. First, I want to thank Karina for taking the time to spend with us and telling us to spend time connecting first as humans, and being supportive in whatever ways we can of each other. And so one of the questions was, if you were recommending two books, what two books would you recommend for us to read? And what do you see has occurred historically that most of us have never learned?
And both of those responses are so recent to me. Last night, I was watching a documentary on the Tulsa Massacre. It's not discussed much. It was just something that I came across. I knew about it, heard about it from conversations with other people, but I didn't know the tragedy that has happened there. And I love history. I'm a proponent of someone that likes to learn from their history, but that is not something that is muchly talked about. Um, as far as books, I this is very interesting. So I am stuck in the middle of a book called Nice Racism. And Nice Racism is by Dr. Robin DiAngelo. Um, the book is written from a white perspective to the white audience. So, of course, I'm struggling with it because the book addresses situations that I've lived. Um, Microaggressions, comments from people, being excluded from different rooms and meetings and participations. I mean, you name it. All of that is addressed in that book in a way that white audiences will be able to understand, be like, hey, I, from her perspective, she has seen so many things and has built relationships with different communities so that she's able to put in the book, it's like, here are the things that you think you could be doing right, but it is harmful for people of color. It's not the right thing to do, and she explained to you why. So I will definitely recommend that book. Um, and the other one, I've made a list. It's part of the list that I've mentioned in there. Um, I keep on going back to How to Be an Anti-Racist, just because of I think we all need that. So I mean, both of them deal with race in a different perspective. So I go and I compare both. When we do this organization does race conversations that we started in December of 2020 as a way to get us talking about race. So I go back to those books as a form of like a reference and try to have different conversations that I feel are needed here.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Another question comment talks about CCL's work in that we talk about climate justice and environmental justice, and CCL's approach is probably more on a national level than a local level. So what recommendations would you make on how we as an organization can look at what's happening on a local level and listen to each other more?
At the local level, I have seen very good work taking place from volunteers themselves that have, sent me messages and have told me things. Boston chapter is a good example on how they're building coalitions and listening to the elected officials as far as like the communities that they need to speak to. There are folks in California that are also are doing their fair work in connecting with individuals and dealing with particular social issues. And I'm trying to remember, Fresno chapter has done some excellent work. We have become so big. Before, when I was like doing a particular kind of work, I was able to sort of follow, but now I rely on volunteers to come to me and sort of tell me what work they were doing. Something that I saw last year that was absolutely phenomenal was the creation of it's almost like a student fellowship program. It was an internship program that was for young Latinas as far as to address climate change. And it was a program that was supported by the local chapter and founded and actually funded by the local chapter. And it was a summer program, excellent program, and just a different, a way to connect to a community that also needed information and able to empower these young women to go into their communities and say, hey, we can talk about climate change, and this is the way to do that.
Okay. So hopefully we have time for a few more questions. They are really coming in now. So one of the questions is carbon fee and dividend is kind of looked at like a market correcting type of mechanism. So the question is, do you think that would be a more helpful and accurate description, knowing that the free market has not been been a helpful force in with disenfranchised and marginalized communities?
I've been saying for a while that I'm like, there are things that I wish the carbon, the carbon fee and dividend policy that we support had, so that it could make it so it would allow us to have more conversations with the communities we want to engage in. There could be changes that could make it possible for sure. Right now, the only thing that I can think of are the 7 recommendations by the NAACP. If I will encourage everyone to go read the NAACP report on how they are feeling about carbon pricing. Go to page, I read the whole thing and I'm thinking there's a particular page, I think it's page 78, 79, where they make recommendations on, how they feel that a carbon policy should look like, that it wouldn't continue to harm communities of color. Yeah, so I would just go to that because they're already telling us what we need to do.
Okay, well, we've talked about climate justice and environmental justice. This will probably be the last question. I see we only have a couple of minutes left. So if you were looking at CCL as an organization, would you put a label on it? Would you label it like a climate justice or an environmental justice type organization, or how would you describe the work that we do?
We are an organization helping people understand how government works. I will go back to that principle. I think that's some of the things that I've learned here. I cannot describe it as an environmental justice organization because I feel that we're not. Mm-hmm. I can share that, I had struggles in the beginnings of the position where I'm in. Because before we were like, oh, Karina, you will be the director of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I purposely took away the word equity. So my title is diversity and inclusion because that is what I feel we do at this time. We are working on trying to engage different communities in all ages and demographics and backgrounds. And we are working on inclusion and what does that look like for our organization. I don't feel we particularly addressing equity. Maybe someone will tell me that I'm wrong. But seeing the work that, that I see that are taking place across the chapters, right now I feel that we are just on, we are in step 1 of so many things that we could do. And my hope would be that we can get to be an organization that focuses on equity and justice.
Well, that was very, very helpful. And I appreciate so much your time this afternoon. On this line, Danny's going to be on in 10 minutes, and So I'm not sure we've got time for any more questions.
I will tell you that, they're saying thank you so much, Karina, for your honesty. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us this afternoon and share your thoughts and the resources that you provided to us. So it's been very, very informational, educational, and helpful for those of us in the session today.